Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graben.
Hi, this is Mark Graben. Welcome to episode 302 of the podcast. It's March 21st, 2018. Joining me today for the third time is Katie Anderson. And today we're chatting because I've just returned from a short trip to Japan, and Katie is going back in May. And you can join her. We'll talk about that in the podcast. You can find more in the show notes by going to leanblog.org/302. Today I'm having a conversation, sharing observations and reflections on topics ranging from standardized work to Kaizen. Would it be easier to, quote unquote, implement lean, or whatever term you would use if you're a Japanese organization? And what are some of the approaches you see with quality improvement and lean in Japan's hospitals? We also end up kind of meandering into topics like sushi and vending machines and other things related to Japan and some of the lessons and takeaways from going and visiting that country. So again, for more information, go to leanblog.org/302. Thanks for listening. Well, hi, Katie. Thank you for being back on the podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Mark. I'm great today, and I'm super excited to be talking to you about our mutual experiences in Japan and follow up from our past conversations.
Yeah, and I'll point to the listeners. Katie and I have talked on the podcast twice before, episode 233 from late 2015, when Katie was living in Japan, and then we did episode 275 in February 2017 with some of her reflections after she was back. So I encourage you to go find those episodes if you like. But we're going to be talking about recent observations that we've both had, future observations that I'm sure Katie will be blogging about. So Katie, maybe you can give kind of a nutshell summary for people who didn't listen to the first episodes, about your experience living in Japan.
Yeah, sure. It was almost about 3.5 years ago. My husband sent me a message saying, "Hey, I have an opportunity for my work to go, for all of us to go move to Japan. What do you think?" And as a lean practitioner, I was thrilled by the idea of going to be able to go learn lean from the source and have that time in Japan. So it was just over 3 years ago that we actually moved to Japan with our family, our 2 little boys, and moved to Tokyo. And we were there for 18 months. And during that time, I really wanted to put intention around learning as much about Japan, about Toyota, about how lean practices, even though there's no Japanese word for lean, but how some of those Toyota production practices are used in different areas in Japan. And I started writing a blog about it because I wanted to share not only what I was learning for myself, but to share it more broadly. And so all of that started about 3 years ago. And then we moved back to the United States just over 18 months ago. And since that time, I'm super excited that I am continuing to use my connections and experiences to be able to share with others. I've been back to Japan 3 times, twice on my own and once as part of a planning trip for a study trip that I'm leading on behalf of the Ohio State University's MBOE program this coming May. And actually, we have a few spots still open for that trip that we're offering as open enrollment. So you don't have to have a connection with the MBOE program or Ohio State. So if you want to come along, Mark will probably provide a link or contact me directly. We'd love to have you be part of that. That's May 12th to 19th. But so I'm going back to Japan again for the 4th time since I've left in May, and I'm super thrilled. I've have this deep connection to Japan and the experiences there. I want to keep learning and sharing.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to go, for one, read Katie's blog at kbjanderson.com. There's a link at the top about more information about the trip. So if you just go to kbjanderson.com, and there's information there. And, I just got back from a trip about 10 days ago. That was my 3rd time ever to Japan, all in the last 5 years. So, and we're going to structure, for the listeners, we're going to structure this as more of a conversation than an interview because I'm curious to hear more of Katie's impressions. And I've only spent a total of 30 days of my life there. You spent 18 months there, and so I may have impressions. They might even still be first impressions, and we're going to bounce some themes and topics back and forth here.
Yeah, great. And it's exciting for me because you hadn't been to Japan in the 3 years since I've moved there. So this is our first time to sort of more freshly talk about our different experiences. So that's great.
So one of the themes we're going to talk about today is standard work or standardized work. And my impressions of what I've seen in those trips. So I'm thinking back to a Toyota operations consulting division guidebook that was given to me years ago, and there's a page there that talks about the interplay between standard work and Kaizen, and they literally drew sort of a circular diagram of one feeding into the other, and it said in the guidebook, kind of yin and yang, chicken egg. Kaizen is the lifeblood of standard work. And standard work is the basis for Kaizen. So when people ask, or I hear the comment, when I hear your reactions on this, when people say, "Oh, lean would be easier if we were Japanese," like I'm not sure from 3 visits there and visiting and talking to organizations if that really is true, because it seems to me, in terms of pros and cons, that Japanese culture and Japanese business culture more typically would rank very high on the adherence to standard work scale, the following rules, but there might be some challenges about people being comfortable sticking their neck out and speaking up and raising a Kaizen idea. So it seems like Toyota has had to work very intentionally to create a culture of continuous improvement. So maybe just to throw it back over to you, Katie, and kind of unravel things to react to. I mean, for one, what's your reaction if people say, "Oh, this would be easier if we were, let's say, a hospital in Japan"? Yeah.
So, again, all these comments are based on, of course, generalizations on people. Individuals always, there's nuances, and not every person fits the stereotype. But I agree with you on that sort of broad, general brushstroke that there is a cultural preference, or maybe it's taught to people about obeying the rules. I mean, I saw a photo that you posted recently on one of your blog posts that no one jaywalks. I mean, they follow the rules. They don't jaywalk, and so perhaps that makes adherence to standard work a little bit easier in Japanese culture because that's ingrained so early on. But I certainly do not believe that, if you go to Japan, you realize quickly that not every company is Toyota, and that, as you said, Toyota's had to work really hard to create its own unique culture and to counter some of those other cultural habits and traits that really might run counter to what we in the West see as lean thinking and practice. And I've written about that for Planet Lean and the Lean Post, and then of course on my blog too, just as I was living there and having these different experiences that sort of, to me, ran counter to what one might expect if you thought that all of Japan was really like Toyota. So I think there's always challenges to any culture at the national culture level, or even a company culture that's different. Nissan is very different than Toyota from Mazda. They all have really different ways that they have what their management practices and how they develop people. But what I've seen is really unique. The thread that I see that ties a lot of companies who are doing what we might say great lean work isn't always about the production processes, but really around respect for people and engaging people every day in problem solving, and really that focus on people first. And I think sometimes maybe we've missed that a bit in the West, where we saw the tools first and didn't focus as much on the people. So, yeah. But companies aren't perfect, or in Japan, that's not, and Toyota has to work at it each and every day to continue their culture as well. And I know there's been hiccups with that in the last decade as it's
Yeah.
really expanded.
Yeah. But, it's funny when we think about this, because one of our Japanese facilitators there on the last trip made a comment about, like, we're Japanese, we follow the rules, and I did see one jaywalker, and I sent you a message about that.
Yeah.
We were trading messages while I was there. Look, I saw one. But I think of kind of just guidelines around order and discipline. That if the rules say you stand on this arrow while you're waiting in line to buy train tickets, people stand on the arrow. If there's you take your shoes off, and the expectation is that you don't just take your shoes off, but you line your shoes up neatly. And we had one of our factory visits there where I wasn't really mindful of that, and as we're on the way back out, I looked and somebody lined up our shoes more neatly than we had left them, and I was sort of embarrassed that we should have done better. But it's we haven't read about this with Toyota, but we've read in the news about a steel company and a few other companies in Japan where there were some fairly embarrassing stories where they were falsifying quality inspection records, and like I said, people aren't perfect. I don't know why people didn't follow the rules in those cases, but it seems like I've heard the word kata over there, not in the context of Mike Rother's work, but if you work at a store, you're taught a kata for how you interact with the customer and wrap what they've bought. So that seems another example. What types of things did you see?
Well, for sure. And the word kata, has two meanings. One's a specific routine that you practice, and then the other is the way of doing things. And so, Mike Rother, took Toyota kata and used that word to describe a certain pattern of behavior that he observed in Toyota, both around problem solving and then coaching. But that's just one pattern. In Japan, there really is kata for everything. And as a Westerner, as a foreigner, we're given a bit of a pass for not understanding or knowing the kata that really, truly runs everyday life. I read an interesting book that was written, in the 80s, I think, called Behind the Japanese Bow, that talks a lot about the history and context of kata. Now, it is definitely from a Western perspective and several decades old, but I found it helpful context to understand how the role of kata patterns and routines and sort of rules really influence day-to-day Japanese behavior and engagement with each other. Mm-hmm. And there's kata everywhere. There's specific ways you're supposed to behave in every circumstance.
Yeah. Well, and our guides, had mentioned the same thing when I've been there, that the Japanese are more forgiving of an outsider not knowing any better. In the South, people say, "Oh, bless their heart," if they were doing something that really violated norms. I don't know if the Japanese have a similar.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
But that's not carte blanche to be an ugly American, like that one YouTube knucklehead who was filming videos and embarrassing.
That was horrible.
Americans, different ways. But I think I was there. It's interesting to see things that stand out. Like after the subway sarin gas terrorist incident, in the early 1990s. It's hard to find. That's one explanation I've heard for why there were very few public trash cans. And so if you buy a canned coffee, it seems like the expectation is you either drink it there and throw it away at the bin that's attached basically to the vending machine, or, I think I'm violating norms a bit by, walking down the street and drinking a beverage. But, I'll throw it away when I see a different vending machine. I've heard stories, people will carry their trash around all day until they get home. You had to do that or something.
Oh my gosh, all the time. Well, all the time. There are very few trash cans, and I've heard a few reasons behind that, but one is trash is very expensive, and so you're kind of expected to take care of your own. But you don't see litter on the ground. People don't just toss it on the ground. You really do carry it with yourself, and either find a vending machine that has a very small hole that you can put some trash in, or you take it with you. And I think some of that comes, also around that respect for society. It's a small island nation, and that came from rice farming, where there was a lot of cooperation that was required for society to exist. It wasn't individualistic. And so and then there's the whole samurai culture and around rules and following the rules. And so those have really influenced day-to-day life. And, walking around eating or drinking is actually very rude. But it's changing, I hear, with the advent of so many Starbucks everywhere, people now walk around with their coffee. So as Japan's getting more influence from outside the country, things are starting to shift because, just there are more influences from other cultures as well.
So one example I heard about some of that Western influence is around eating sushi. And somebody said that generally nigiri or rolls would always be considered finger food, that sashimi would be picked up for people who aren't in the sushi. Sashimi is just a slice of fish with no rice underneath. And that you would use chopsticks for that the idea that you would pick up a piece of nigiri with your chopsticks, so that's sort of been brought into the country by Americans.
Well, right. It's actually quite awkward to pick up a piece of sushi on rice with chopsticks. Also, never mix your wasabi with your soy sauce. Put that on the side. It's actually been very hard for me to come back to the U.S. and go out for Japanese food, especially sushi and sashimi, because we in America love everything bigger, and so we want bigger pieces of fish and sushi. But you're supposed to be able to eat a whole piece at once. Right.
You're supposed to just throw it all in your mouth. Right.
Yes. So, but
yeah, I wrote a blog post about I took a sushi making class and we learned how to make sushi, and of course there were many rules. And then he talked about how to eat sushi. Don't take a bite off of the piece of sushi. Don't dip the rice into the soy sauce.
It'll fall apart.
He said, it makes a little Mount Fuji of rice in the dish. And so part of the concern there, you talk about this, this history of rice, and, he was very, very specific when, he had already cooked rice, but then he taught us how to mix in the sushi vinegar and how to work with it. And he was very clear that, even though you're supposed to dip your hands in water and you don't want rice sticking to your hands, if it does stick, here's a wet towel, wipe the rice back into the bowl. And we used every single last grain of rice in that bowl. And I think there was a real respect for the rice, or not wasting food. And he was very intentional about that.
Absolutely. You're as you're talking, it's reminding me of an experience I had in January, and actually we'll be including this in our trip in May to Japan, but visiting an elementary school outside of Nagoya. And you may have seen some of the videos, but in starting at very young age, children learn how to not only serve each other, so they rotate and actually serve lunch, but they are only supposed to serve what they actually can eat. So there's no wasted food, and they're expected to eat what they serve. And with the younger kids, as they're starting to learn that, there's some flexibility, but really, again, it's found that respect for our community, respect for the food that we have, opposed to all the waste that we in the West that we just have with food and other things too. So it's that respect for is really deeply ingrained in the society.
Yeah. One other thing when you talk about variation, and that's where I think of standardized work versus standard work. The sushi chef was saying, ideally, like as you were saying, you're supposed to be able to put the whole piece of nigiri in your mouth. You should be sizing the piece, especially the rice, to each customer's mouth.
Yes.
And if you have a customer with a smaller mouth, and I think he was generalizing, so it might be a woman.
Yes. Well,
she has you should serve a smaller piece of nigiri. And so I thought there's an interesting definition of standard. Standard doesn't mean that there's a rice ball that weighs X number of grams, but the standard says, and there's certainly standard for how it's formed and pressed together with the fish and served, but that standard could be flexible.
right, to meet the needs of the customer.
Of that customer.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose. So, if you have a smaller mouth, you might feel a little bit ripped off, though. That's the
Yes.
thing of the price varies.
No, the price definitely usually does not vary, but
So
yeah, I think it's just interesting the different, the lens at which we look at situations and behavior based on sort of the norms that we were taught in our countries of origin or cultures of origin, and how we see those different nuances.
Mm-hmm. So the next topic, maybe we'll go ahead and transition over to the idea of customer focus or customer obsession. It's not uniquely Japanese. Amazon, I think, uses the phrase customer obsession, and other companies are known for that. But when I think in a previous visit, there was a manufacturing company that had a big sign that said literally, and it was in Japanese and English. It said the customer is God, which is so it might not rub everyone the right way, but I think the idea is customers are very important. And you have a story from your most recent trip over that you blogged about from a restaurant that I was hoping you could share.
Absolutely. I had this experience within the 10-hour period. We had 3 very amazing Japanese, only in Japan experiences that happened. The first was not around this concept of customer service, or motenashi is the word in Japan. But I'll start off with there because it sort of set the stage for everything. My friend who lives in Japan left her wallet on the bus, but all of us were totally blasé about it. No big deal. She'll check in 4 hours. It will definitely be returned. We were fully confident that it would be returned, and we just continued to go out to lunch. And sure enough, 4 hours later, she checked back, and there it was. And then on our way back to the train station, there was a woman, you can go to my blog post about this, holding her arms out. And it was a busy train station. And we thought, oh, okay, this is where we should be lining up. And she looked at us with horror in her eyes because we were, standing right where she actually did not want us to stand. We looked up and there was tiny, tiny, every so often drips of water coming. And she was protecting us from the water falling on our heads. And I was I was like, wherever would this happen besides Japan? And that set us up for the super amazing experience that evening, which is really a sign of how just little things we can take them to go make an experience over and beyond what a customer might even expect from a good or great experience. So we were at a restaurant, and all the restaurants are small. And at the end of our meal, we left, and we were actually in Japan in January, which was the coldest weather temperatures that Tokyo or Japan had experienced in almost 50 years. So it was really cold, sub-zero Celsius temperatures. Anyway, we put our jackets on, and as we were walking out to get a taxi, you put your hands in your pocket, and they had put those little hand warmers in each of our pockets. And it was just
chemical packs?
The way you take them skiing and put them in your gloves and you shake them out and they hot for 8 hours. It was amazing. It was just totally unexpected. And so appreciated. My husband and I actually ran back to the restaurant to tell them thank you. And of course, in freezing temperatures, our 2 servers were standing outside the restaurant in just their, regular clothes, bowing with big smiles on their face. And just, so we said, thank you, in Japanese to them. And it was just to me showed how you can really delight a customer by doing something as small and simple as putting hand warmers in their pockets on a cold night. Yeah. And how, we can do that here in the West too, but it's just that concept of omotenashi and really exceeding a service standard is really, it's pervasive across Japan.
Yeah. Well, I think it's touching when you said you said the bows, the waves when you leave, or when we went on visits on our tours. We'd be on the bus and driving away, and our hosts or the company president or somebody would be there waving, and we would wave the entire time until they couldn't see us anymore.
Yes, you have to. The wave, because they want to show their respect for you, and really it should be your respect for them. They've taken time out of their day to show us, show you what their company and take them inside. But you and I have also talked about how it's sort of this interesting contrast in Japan where, there's this amazing sense of customer service and just like the bowing and the respect and the beautiful wrapping and all of those like small little touches that just makes things beautiful and special. And yet at the same time, don't ask for any customization. Like if you want something that's different from how, say, something is served, don't dare ask for it because that's breaking the rules. And most often than not, they'll come back and say, that's very difficult. We can't do that. You're like, well, you don't need to put a tomato on the sandwich, but no, it comes with the tomato. And you learn pretty quickly when you've spent some time in Japan, it's just the level of customization that we might equate with customer service in the West is not that's not what customer service means over there. So it's just an interesting reflection on what does customer service mean. And that may differ by sort of our cultural preferences or expectations.
Yeah. Well, and I was, there was one time where I thought maybe we violated some rules. I was going to point out first, I just did a Google search, those hand warmers. A pair of those, if you buy them in a box of 40 pair, are about 60 cents a pair. So you think of like what a small investment that is in making and not delighting, surprising your customer with something totally unexpected.
Right. I mean, it was pretty mind blowing. It was awesome. Yeah.
But I think the one time there were a couple times we went in some small groups. I was there. The tour was kind of all inclusive from Monday morning through Friday afternoon. But there was a group of us that went out the Sunday night. It was a smaller group, and we went to dinner on our own. And then similar thing happened when I was in Tokyo after the tour on a walking food tour that was run through a company, and there were 7 of us, and we decided to stop and have a separate drink that was going to be out of our own pocket that wasn't included in the tour, and we bought one for our guide, and so there were like 6 or 7 of us who had ordered different things, and the 2 times we asked a server to split a check. At the one restaurant, I'm pretty sure the server, he kind of rolled his eyes at us. And the woman at the bar was a little bit more like, well, it would be difficult. And she put together a single bill, and we're like, okay, we'll figure it out. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where I'm like, should we have known better than to ask? Or was that just maybe a rare moment of service? Did you have experiences with that, splitting checks, or was that just not done? I
think I would have learned pretty quickly that just go with how it is and don't ask for something separate. I mean, and that's fine. It's also about fitting in with the culture and expectations, of the country you're in, and having your respect for that too. But no, I mean, you wouldn't know that necessarily coming from overseas. I think some restaurants might have done that, but probably not more generally.
Yeah, I'm looking at a post on TripAdvisor where a couple of people say, unless it's a busy izakaya, there's a term betsu.
I don't know that one.
And but so some people say it sounds like it's not completely unheard of, but maybe it depends on which places you're looking at. But you talk about the lost wallet story, or the left behind wallet. I had a similar thing. I blogged about this. I was at the Tsukiji fish market, and I think I was just like excited that I had the opportunity to eat uni out of a cut in half sea urchin. Are you an uni fan? I am not an uni fan, but I can appreciate from those who are the level, the quality of uni that you get in Japan is unparalleled. Yeah. So I think I was just like, oh wow, look at that, and I was excited. And the price was an even 1,000 yen, or a little less than $10.
Yep.
And unlike Europe, where the bills are different sizes, and I'm not blaming the system here, this is my screw up. I thought, okay, well, I'll hand them a 1,000 yen note and walk away. But at least I followed the norm of, it seemed like the norm is, you stand and eat the food where you bought it. Because they have a trash can that was pretty clearly labeled for their customers' trash. Mm-hmm. And so I'm standing there, and I think I'd taken a bite or two. I was just loving this uni. And one of the guys from the stand comes out and around, and he comes over and he's holding some other bills. Apparently, I had mistakenly given him a 10,000 yen note.
Overpaid by like $90.
About a $90 mistake.
Yeah.
And I probably would have never realized it.
No. Yeah.
And so he came over and he's like, basically, you forgot your change. And then I realized what I had done.
Yeah, you're like, my change.
And he joked and he's like, unless you want me to keep it. I was like, thank you, and apologizing because now I've interrupted his workflow. He was good-natured about it, but I did feel terrible.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed.
Oh, gaijin moment, foreigner moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as we're talking, I'm reflecting like what, going to Japan is so, just from the food and the culture experience is so amazing. But as like lean practitioners, I think it's so helpful to see that what are those things that, might be culturally influencing different elements of practice and what are things that are different and then to just open our eyes and sort of challenge our own assumptions about culture and Toyota and what lean is and what does it really mean to respect people and just having those experiences outside of our own expectations of what the norm is can help us see things in a different way. Yeah,
I think the way I would put it, when you're in such a different environment, I think it really forces you to pay attention to everything. And that can be tiring. I think a lot of times when you're in familiar circumstances, it's easy to kind of go on autopilot. But I think it helps you notice little details about the site visits and just the way things are conducted. And maybe, we'll transition and talk a little bit about experiences visiting different hospitals. My experience is that, I think it's a non-random population of hospitals that are selected to go and visit. And they're not all, I haven't seen any hospital that's sort of magically by default lean. It's something they are having to work on. I've seen some very precisely organized areas where they would say we are practicing 5S. And I've seen some operating room cabinets that were just as cluttered and chaotic as something you might see elsewhere. And so I think, and I mean no disrespect in saying this, but I think a takeaway is that these organizations are not perfectly, and we can be respectful and we can learn from them. But I think it also it sort of teaches me not to put them up on some pedestal. Yeah, that's unfair either. Right, and that lean is not, or lean thinking, our construct of that is not inherently easy, no matter what culture you're in, what industry in which you work, or who you are as a person. I think it really like the principles that came from, what we call lean, from Toyota, and what they've evolved. It's been the combination of some really good thinking, both the West and the East, and they challenge all of us at different levels and to get better. But it's not inherently easy. I think it was interesting too. You and I've had that. We've talked about this quite a bit. How the hospitals seem to have much more of a clinical quality circle focus, and not as much focused on the management system, which we tend to, and at least from my experience in healthcare, focus more on now too, not just how are we doing improvement projects, but how is it a connected system across the organization, the enterprise. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting as well. And I think, I was just going to build on what you're saying around TQM, where the hospitals, I've had some repeat visits and some new visits. So in the 3 trips, I've seen 3 or 4 hospitals each trip. I've probably seen 6 or 7. I'd have to go back through my notes. And the common theme is total quality management, where these hospitals, and it's always the hospital managing director, or basically CEO, who's talking about their history, who's always a doctor. I heard this last trip that's by law. Yes, it is by law. Which is interesting. But they were, they'll talk about their 20 or 25 or 35 years of consistent, diligent practice of total quality management. And it's clear that it's that culture and that quality and whatever transformation they've made or that they're working on with lean is owned by the CEO, which I do find that inspiring. And that's something you don't always see in a quote unquote lean journey in an organization and other hospitals or in other countries, I mean.
Yeah.
But I think, go ahead.
No, I'd say I agree. I think at least the hospitals I visited, and some of which were on your recommendation, I was able to get connections there. There's passion from the leader around clinical quality and how they deliver that at the organization.
Yeah. But I think, there's that, like I said, the quality circle projects are, so the pros are they want everybody involved in improvement. But they tend to be these 6-month-long, very structured projects. It's almost structured like an A3, but it's more like an A3 that you're doing by meeting occasionally over a period of 6 months.
Right.
And, one hospital I went to, they had a program going on it's become part of the way they do things, of what they call small Kaizen, faster, sort of quick and easy Kaizen style improvements, where they said, Kaizen can be faster than quality circles.
Yes.
And one hospital I went to, an academic medical center, had a retired Toyota person, and this was formally encouraged by Toyota. They were teaching doctors how to do A3s. So there are things we would recognize as lean practices, but it seems to be built on a really solid foundation of TQM more often than not.
Yep. Yes. And again, you get back to that word lean. There is not a concept of lean as we know it outside of Toyota. There are elements that different organizations practice, but there isn't this like lean construct. And I think that plays a role too in being able to, I don't know, what we might expect for when we say lean. You might see elements in different pieces, but not the whole thing. Outside of Toyota is very, it's not so common, and certainly outside of manufacturing.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to see how certain practices evolve outside of Toyota, or, things that are framed as lean daily management.
Right.
I saw metrics posted in some departments. I was taking heavy advantage of the Google Translate app, which is brilliant in that you can hold up the live camera and it will translate stuff well enough where you can say, oh, that's a chart about what percentage of patients have waited this long or not, which it's mind-boggling. But you can kind of get a better sense of, well, what's on that bulletin board? Like, is that announcements? Is it, and it's I think all the types of things you would see here. Sometimes there's things posted about changes to the process. There's improvements that have been posted in some cases. But I don't know if that construct of that lean daily management system, if that's an American interpretation. I'm curious to dig into that more.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like an American interpretation, because it certainly exists within Toyota. But we gave words to it from Toyota, and that's what, or at least how it was described, that was what Toyota was doing. It doesn't mean that. So it's more our vision of what lean is comes from Toyota, but you don't see a lot of people changing jobs historically, or roles, or moving between companies, and so that knowledge sharing doesn't happen as often historically in Japan too. So you're not seeing some of that cross pollination where you do see a bit more of that in the U.S. and bringing in different ideas from different industries or different companies. That really doesn't typically happen. Japan. And an upside of that is you have a lot of leadership stability. And I think, Toyota was able to create its culture because it was growing people within, and they, continued to develop the TPS and like the Toyota way and everything that meant. You don't see, I think one of the challenges, you and I've been talking about too in healthcare is that, there'll be great traction in, say, a lean management system in a healthcare organization or any other organization, and then the leader changes after a few years, and thing, then that's the new flavor of the month, unless that person came in with that perspective as well. And so I just think it's interesting that there may be some of the reasons that lean thinking and practice is not as common throughout Japan is because of that lack of changing of leaders and companies. But one of the reasons that it's impeding us here in the U.S. is that, that people come in and with a different perspective and totally change the system.
Yeah. Well, and you have that, and then there's the question of, you come back to the thing I mentioned earlier about Kaizen and the willingness to speak up and to point out a problem and to change things. My very first trip there, one of our tour leaders was an American who was basically raised in Japan, had lived there a long time. With Brad.
Yeah, Brad.
And he taught Brad Schmidt. Yeah. And he taught, the very first thing he taught us was the concept of big harmony. And that it's a culture based around blending in. You look at how people dress in the subways and their for their commutes, and there's a certain it seems like the opportunity to express yourself is how tight your tie is tied. Yeah. Seems like maybe the rebels have their ties a little bit looser, and there were some people without ties. But we're talking about this idea of the analogies of the tall nail gets hammered down, the tall blade of grass gets mowed first, and it seems like that mindset would make Kaizen a challenge. And that's where I wonder about Toyota creating a culture of creating mechanisms like the andon cord. Yep. To make it very clear, here we want you to speak up. And I think Americans, again, let me generalize about Americans. I might be tempted to say, well, I like to do it. I like to do the work this way. This works for me. And there might be a high willingness to speak up, but organizations might have kind of stifled that over time. What are your thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, well, so when I went down to the Toyota Kyushu plant on the southern island of Kyushu, there was a video about Ono in the early days, and a comment that I don't remember it verbatim right now, but really stood out to me in the video was that he got a lot of resistance about some of these concepts he was bringing in. I think maybe one of them was andon, but it was about doing work in a different way, and that he was getting a lot of pushback, and something around like change is always hard, or the people were resistant and didn't like the change. And to me, that really spoke to, it wasn't easy for them either. This way of thinking and practice was really something different. And, maybe to your point, like pulling the andon cord wasn't an easy automatic practice, but it was through the routine and the support and, building in that habit and the cultural acceptance at Toyota of this is the way we do business and this is actually rewarded, builds in that same culture. And I think it speaks to us that we can create that culture within our organizations as well. It just requires that commitment and that support.
Yeah. I think it takes that commitment. It takes that leadership involvement. I mean, Toyota has been successful in the United States and other countries. We know there are examples of really great lean cultures in the U.S. and other parts of the world. So I don't think it can be said anymore that this only works in Japan, or that this requires some sort of innate Japanese characteristics. I mean, I think my takeaway from it is that there are pros and cons in different cultures around the world that are more hierarchical or less hierarchical. There's probably other dimensions that we could look at, but it seems like organizations have the ability to be intentional about trying to create a culture.
Absolutely. It's interesting. So I've become really good friends with Mr. Isao Yoshino, who was a 40-plus year Toyota leader who spent 14 years of his career, I think it was 14, in the United States. And he was actually John Shook's first manager in Toyota City outside of Nagoya. And we've talked about some of these concepts because he has a little bit of experience, in both cultures, and also how Toyota was really trying to continue to embed this way of thinking across the organization. And something that really stood out for me is how he was telling me about this ConPro program, and he's written about it with John on the Lean Post as well, but how some of the thinking that we would consider just the norm at Toyota was starting to degrade, and that leadership was realizing that some of what we call A3 thinking or problem-solving thinking, and the manager's role as supporting that thinking, wasn't happening in the back offices. It wasn't happening as strongly in all parts of the organization. They put a concentrated effort that Mr. Yoshino was part of over 2 years to really coach and teach people A3 thinking and Hoshin development, because it wasn't just happening automatically. And so that, again, you really have to put that cultural attention from the top, and then support people through that. And so it's not just it wasn't just magic at Toyota that this has become how they work, but it was with real intention and practice and focus.
Yeah. Well, and there's a blog post I'll encourage people. It's on the front page of the blog still right now, kbjanderson.com. A reminder from a recent visit to Japan: lean is not inherently Japanese, is the title of that post. So I encourage people to find that. And as we wrap up here, you mentioned at the beginning the tour that you're working on with Ohio State and the MBOE program. There's information about that at the top of your page. But if you can kind of mention the tour again, who is it intended for? What are some of the types of things you would see?
Yeah, great. The tour is intended for people who have some knowledge of lean and are trying to practice it in their organizations. The MBOE program is a 1-year working professional master's where folks have been exposed to lean thinking and practice there. And so it's not a beginner entry into lean, but really it doesn't require extensive experience either. We're going there to look beyond just the tools. We're really looking at the social side of lean, a lot of the things that we've talked about today. We're going to be visiting Toyota itself, as well as 2 different suppliers, which I think is really interesting. We're going to a tier 3 supplier and a tier 2, and you can see how lean thinking and practice has really developed at those companies. Mr. Yoshino, who I mentioned earlier, is going to join us for 3 days of the trip, which is really unparalleled access. He's going to be on the bus with us, not giving a few lectures, but also just spending time with the participants to talk throughout the day, which I think is really fabulous. We're going back to the town of Ashikaga, which I've written about, which is like the town that considers itself the 5S capital of the world, to see their own style
You've blogged about that.
Yeah, about how 5S is a way they see to revitalize their community and their industry and really engage people every day. And then some other great experiences, both in the Nagoya area and the Tokyo area, talking with the leader, the past president of the Shinkansen cleaning company that's famous for the 7-minute miracle. You can find that on the bullet trains, of the cleaning of the turnaround time, which is both the omotenashi concept of all you see them bowing when the train comes and when the people come off, but how they actually turn the train in less than 7 minutes and totally clean, which is fabulous. So anyway, I'm really excited about going back to Japan and being able to share my own experiences with people and connect them with deeper learning experiences in the Gemba in Japan. So reach out if you're interested in joining us, and hope that you can.
Yeah, well, I encourage people to do that. They can encourage people, go to Katie's website, kbjanderson.com. If people want to contact you directly, can you share email address, or what do you recommend?
Email is probably the best way, and happy to set up a call too. My email is Katie, Katie, at kbjanderson.com. So kbjanderson.com. All
right. Well, thank you, Katie. Again, our guest today has been Katie Anderson, 3rd-time guest on the podcast. Let's, we could talk. I would love hearing more of your reflections, and maybe we will come up with something that triggers us doing
Absolutely.
This again, continuing the discussion sometime soon.
Great. Thanks, Mark. It's great to hear about some of your recent experiences in Japan, too.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.